another crisis. President Joe Biden's special envoy to Haiti resigns in protest. Pro-life protections. Senator John Thune tells us why he's speaking out about abortion. Overseas abortion. A court ruling threatens to diminish people with disabilities. And remembering a saint. We hear more about one of the most beloved figures in the Catholic faith whose feast we celebrate today. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden, special envoy to Haiti, calls it quits. He is not happy with how the administration is treating Haitian migrants on the U.S. southern border. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, that diplomat, Daniel Foote, wrote in a resignation letter that he would, quote, not be associated with the United States' inhumane, counterproductive decision to deport thousands of Haitian refugees and illegal immigrants to Haiti.
Career diplomat Daniel Foote walking away from the job he was appointed to just a few months ago, protesting those large-scale expulsions of Haitian migrants to their homeland, which has been racked by civil strife and natural disasters. Journalists tried to ask Vice President Kamala Harris about it.
What's your reaction to the U.S. envoy resigning to Haiti?
But she kept walking away after greeting the president of Ghana. The border crisis escalated when 14,000 Haitian migrants showed up at the small Texas town of Del Rio. The Biden administration let thousands into the U.S. and flew others back to Haiti. But one Democratic lawmaker warns the border surge will likely continue.
There's at least another 30,000 Haitians in Mexico right now. There's also another 30,000 in Colombia also. I understand there's about 15,000 Haitians in Panama.
Still, faith leaders representing 164 Catholic organizations want President Joe Biden to end the Title 42 program, designed to slow the spread of coronavirus that blocks some migrants from entering the U.S.
The faith leaders write the misuse of Title 42 is anti-science and perpetuates anti-immigrant tropes, and we cannot restore the soul of the nation with the continued misuse of Title 42. When the White House press secretary was asked this afternoon why the president is not using his bully pulpit to speak out forcefully himself on the treatment of Haitians.
The Secretary of Homeland Security oversees these efforts and has been quite outspoken and quite visible on what steps we should take moving forward. And he certainly may still speak to it.
Now, the State Department has criticized former Special Envoy Foote for resigning in the middle of a crisis. Meanwhile, tomorrow, President Joe Biden meets with 3 world leaders from Australia, Japan, and India. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the battle over abortion is heating up among lawmakers. Pro-lifers are trying to fend off a bill that would make abortions much easier to get on a permanent basis, and they warned of the consequences. A vote on the bill is scheduled for this week. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
The Women's Health Protection Act is so important to Senate Minority Whip John Thune that he made a speech against it on the Senate floor. He says that the bill goes way beyond Roe v. Wade and any Supreme Court rulings on abortion, and he warned Congress that it's at a dangerous crossroads.
A more accurate name might be the Abortion on Demand Act, or we could simply refer to it as what it is, probably the most anti-life legislation ever to be considered in the United States Congress.
The bill would eliminate virtually all existing state abortion laws, even those upheld by the Supreme Court. But there's more.
The bill would make it essentially impossible to impose any meaningful restrictions at all on abortion in any stage of pregnancy, including after the point of fetal viability, when the baby can survive outside its mother.
Senator John Thune tells me states need to get more involved.
We need elected officials to stand up against this craziness and make sure that we send a clear statement that people's tax dollars, the dollars they pay to the federal government to fund their government, isn't being used for a practice that they find absolutely offensive.
San Francisco Archbishop Salvatore Corleone warned in a statement that, quote, this proposed legislation is nothing short of child sacrifice. It is especially shameful that any self-professed Catholic would be implicated in such an evil, let alone advocate for it.
Madam Speaker, just wanted to ask you about the Women's Health Care Protection Act.
So I asked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who is Catholic and from San Francisco, what she thinks. She tells me her family is pro-life, but she believes a woman has a right to choose.
The Archbishop of the city, that area of San Francisco, and I have a disagreement about who should decide this. I believe that God has given us a free will to honor our responsibilities.
Republicans only need a handful of Democrats to defeat the Women's Health Protection Act. The House is scheduled to vote on it tomorrow. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A group of House Republicans has filed articles of impeachment against President Biden. The New York Post reports the impeachment is over the immigration crisis at the southern border and the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. One of the Republicans says that it will be hard to move forward, given that Democrats are in control of both the House and the Senate. And joining us now is Tom Bevan, president and co-founder of Real Clear Politics. Tom, welcome back. Great to see you again. As we just mentioned, articles of impeachment have been levied against President Biden. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and how you see this playing out.
Well, it's obviously not going to go anywhere with Nancy Pelosi in charge of the House and obviously Chuck Schumer in charge of the Senate. This is actually the second time Marjorie Taylor Greene filed articles of impeachment against Biden the day after he took office. And so this is largely a symbolic effort. 4 Republicans have joined in. Now, things might be different a year from now or so if Republicans can win back the House of Representatives in the midterm election. Then something like this might be more than symbolic, depending on what the status is at that point. But right now, it's simply just registering a disappointment, disapproval of Biden's handling of certain issues, and is purely symbolic.
Yeah, and according to the latest Gallup poll, President Joe Biden's approval ratings have dropped to 43%, with the majority of Americans now disapproving of his job performance. Let's talk more about that. What's led to this drop? And do you think that President Biden can rebound and gain back the confidence of the American people?
Well, we shall see about that. I mean, certainly the Gallup number was bad for him. It's his lowest number in that poll. And in our Real Clear Politics average of multiple polls, Biden he reached a low of 45% about 10 days ago, is back to about 46%. Again, that's an average of many polls. His disapproval rating is now over 50% for the first time and has been there for about 4 days in a row now. And so the question for Biden is, obviously he's dealing with multiple crises. Bad news is coming every single day. The problem is that one of the issues that he's suffered from is this, sort of lack of trust with the American people. He has told them repeatedly things about Afghanistan, things about the border, and other issues that are contradicted by reports on the ground. And that is something that once that's lost, it's very tough to recover from. So we'll have to see where this goes from here. But 45% for Biden is not a very good number, and it certainly has Democrats nervous, again, as they consider the midterms next year with a bunch of, particularly in the Senate, Democratic incumbents that could be vulnerable.
Yeah, and you mentioned the border. Let's talk about that. The crisis there just seems to be getting worse and worse. And today, as we talked about before, the special envoy to Haiti resigned over the deportation of Haitian migrants. This, as we've also been hearing, there are a number of those migrants that are being released into the U.S. on a large scale. What more do you know about this and what the Biden administration is actually doing to get that situation at the border under control?
Well, so Jen Psaki just had a press briefing today and took a lot of questions about this. And again, this is, and one of those questions was, there were 15,000 Haitian migrants under the border in Del Rio, Texas, just a couple of days ago. Now the administration says that they've sent about 1,500 back and there are only 5,000 left, which leaves about 9,000 or so that are unaccounted for. And the administration is not giving precise numbers about just exactly how many people have been released into the United States and under what circumstances. Jen Psaki said some of them are being transferred to ICE detention centers. Some of them are giving NTAs, notice to appear, at some point in the future, that understanding that they would, when called, would come back and deal with their immigration status. Not a lot of folks often do that. So, and this is part of the problem. There's no easy fix for the Biden administration right now. They continue to say that the border is closed, but the actual results on the ground suggest that it's not closed. It's not exactly what they are saying. And so it's a real political headache, and it doesn't look like it's going to come to a conclusion anytime soon.
And Tom, before I let you go, we've about a minute or so left. I understand Real Clear Investigations has a story about National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and how he's tied into Special Counsel John Durham's grand jury investigation. What more can you tell us about that?
So Paul Sperry wrote for Real Clear Investigations, again, published this morning, that Jake Sullivan, he was not named in the Durham indictment that came out, but Paul has sources that suggest that he was an unnamed. He was described by his job description, and that he is involved in and was involved in the spreading of the misinformation about Alpha Bank that landed Michael Sussman, the lawyer from Perkins Coie, in this Durham indictment. And so there's much more to come on this, I think, in the future. But for right now, it looks as if Jake Sullivan is at the center or near the center of the ongoing Durham probe and Durham investigation.
Well, Tom, we will be keeping our eye on that for sure. Thank you so much for your time today. Tom Bevan, president and co-founder of Real Clear Politics. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Former president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has died. Bishop Emeritus Anthony Pilla of the Diocese of Cleveland passed away this week at the age of 88. He was the shepherd of his home diocese for 26 years. He also served as USCCB president from 1995 to 1998. He is recognized for initiatives to sustain parishes in urban areas. A British court rules against a challenge to its abortion law brought by a woman with Down syndrome. 26-year-old Heidi Crowder and two other plaintiffs lost their discrimination claim. A provision allows abortion up until birth for conditions like Down syndrome, but restricts other abortions after 24 weeks. Crowder plans to appeal. 47 pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong appeared in court today. They are charged with subversion for organizing a primary election last year, which the government then postponed due to COVID-19. All but 12 have been in detention since March. Taiwan's application to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership has drawn a strong rebuke from China.
台湾地区是中国不可分割的一部分。
Claiming sovereignty, China opposes Taiwan's entry into any international agreements, heightening a potential confrontation. Last week, Beijing made its own application to join the multinational trading bloc, which the U.S. left during the Trump administration. While China's deeply indebted Evergrande avoids a default under terms of a restructured loan, the real estate developer rebounded during today's trading after a $36 million debt settlement. The short-term deal averts a feared financial crisis, but still leaves the company vulnerable. Its combined domestic and international debt is more than $300 billion US. Coming up, sanctity of life. Former Vice President Mike Pence speaks about the challenge to Roe versus Wade. And abortion in Mexico. A recent ruling challenges the pro-life movement. Former Vice President Mike Pence says that he is hopeful the Supreme Court will overturn Roe versus Wade, the landmark 1973 decision to legalize abortion across the United States.
And it is our hope and our prayer that in the coming days, a new conservative majority on the Supreme Court of the United States will take action to restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law.
The Republican from Indiana also noted the Trump administration appointed nearly 300 conservative judges to federal courts. The former vice president was speaking at a conference in Hungary, which focuses on how to reverse falling birth rates in the Western world. Well, earlier this month, Mexico's Supreme Court unanimously ruled that abortion is not a crime. Additionally, the court recently struck down a law that protected doctors from performing medical treatments that go against their morals. A group of 30 medical associations advocated for their right to conscientious objections. And joining us now to discuss this is Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of the CNA Aussie Group. Alejandro, great to see you. So good to be with you today.
Great to be here.
So I want to get your take on all this. What we're seeing in Mexico, what do you think triggered all of this?
Oh, very simple. The U.S. administration. Not many Americans are aware of the significance of the leadership of the U.S. government around the world, in Latin America, and very specifically in Mexico. So if you remember, Tracy, how cooperative Mexican authorities were with the previous administration in terms of immigration, for example, well, when the Mexican Supreme Court was deciding that abortion is not a crime, it's not by chance that the chancellor of the Mexican government was here visiting the White House, and that decision happened very little after Kamala Harris, the vice president, visited Mexico. So it is basically a politics related to a commercial relationship with the United States.
Yeah, and as we also mentioned, the Supreme Court down there that's striking down the conscientious objections for doctors. Talk more about that and the implications of that.
Yes, so the Mexican law used to include a very robust conscientious objection. And the Supreme Court originally ruled that law was not contrary to the Mexican Constitution. So in one step, they decided to leave the law as it is. But then in a second unprecedented decision, they said that the law was not phrased sufficiently well. So this is like the Supreme Court of the United States arguing that a specific law passed by Congress is a law that should be rewritten, and that they will offer their draft, quote unquote, for how should it be rewritten. That's completely out of the authority and the power of the Supreme Court in Mexico, completely unprecedented, but again, unfortunately, consistent to what the U.S. administration currently wants in the rest of the world regarding abortion.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Alejandro, I mean, what are you hearing from people down there? You know, what are they saying about all of this?
There is tremendous frustration, Tracy, and it's very easy to understand. If you go to the frequent polls that even feminist organizations finance in general in Latin America, they have been investing a significant amount of American dollars into promoting abortion, and the needle has moved very little in favor of abortion. So if it is not imposed by the elites, abortion just doesn't have a chance in Latin America.
Yeah. You know, I also want to quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but quickly talk about what we're seeing in Argentina as well. Can you talk about that? Let our folks know.
Yes. So as you know, Argentina legalized abortion by a very small majority in the Senate. So abortion is legal right now, but more and more organizations are looking for legal ways to counteract abortion. And again, the influence of United States pro-lifers is being a good model and template of how to push back, because as you know, the pro-life movement has been very successful during the years in pushing back Roe v. Wade. That's a template that is now being used in Argentina. So the story about abortion in Argentina is not over.
Yeah, and I was going to say that, bring up the United States and the differences, you know, what we're seeing happening in Latin America and the changes that are happening here in the United States. Can we talk quickly about that?
Yes, basically Latin America is delayed in what the United States have learned. You know, in the United States, we see now a movement that is probably turned Roe v. Wade for good. In Latin America, unfortunately, we are still on the way down. But again, the pro-life movement is learning very quickly, and abortion is being stopped in several countries right now.
Yeah, well, Alejandro, thank you so much for your time today, coming on and being on the show and speaking with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here, Tracy.
Thank you. Up next, Papal Mass. The Holy Father celebrates with the bishops of Europe. And we hear more about Padre Pio, whose feast is today. Pope Francis says Europe, sick of fatigue, returns to the vision of the founders.
Ricostruite la mia casa.
This afternoon, the Holy Father celebrated Mass with the Council of Bishops' Conferences of Europe. Pope Francis encouraged bishops to reflect on the three words that challenge us as Christians and bishops in Europe: reflect, rebuild, and save. And finally tonight is the feast of Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, better known as Padre Pio. Born in 1887, Padre Pio decided at a young age to dedicate his life to God. He became a Franciscan and was known for hearing confession for hours at a time. He is also known as being patient, suffering, fervent in prayer, and compassionate spiritual guidance. Padre Pio died in 1968 and was declared a saint in 2002. And joining us now is Julie Fitts Ritter, Executive Director of the Padre Pio Foundation of America. Julie, great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us. As mentioned, absolutely, Padre Pio really had a great devotion to and a gift for hearing confession, sometimes up to 10 hours at a time. It's unbelievable. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. People would tell the priests that I know, that I knew, I should say, that knew Padre Pio would say he would be praying the rosary all day. I mean, and hearing confessions. While he was hearing confession, he would be praying the rosary at the same time. So he spent many, many hours in the confessional. People would line up to go to confession to him. They would sign up for days and weeks in advance so they could go to confession.
That's so beautiful. And I understand that Pope Paul VI called Padre Pio, quote, a man of suffering. And in fact, Padre Pio himself actually founded a hospital in southern Italy called Home to Relieve Suffering, which Pope Francis visited in 2018. Can you talk more to us about that, and also tell us in what ways did Padre Pio suffer?
Yeah, Padre Pio suffered in many ways. Of course, he bore the stigmata. So they say he would bleed a cup of blood a day. And he was persecuted throughout his life, not able to celebrate Mass at certain times of his life because people would say he was a fraud. Of course, those things were disproven. And obviously, as we all know, he is now a saint. But the hospital was a very, very important part of his life. He really, really had great compassion for those who suffered and for those who were in need. And it started early, in the 20s when he really wanted to start doing something. And by the 1940s, they started raising money and building the hospital. And the hospital actually opened in 1956. It's now one of the greatest, it's a great hospital. It's one of the best hospitals in Italy. And they have a lot of research associated with it as well. There's over 800 beds in the hospital, and they do, and people don't pay to go there. It's not like you go in and you get charged. It's really a spiritual place. And Padre Pio actually called it, the hospital, his earthly work. And yeah, it was called the Home for the Relief of Suffering. It's there, and it's a tribute to Padre Pio's life.
That is amazing. I love that. In what ways is he still relevant today? Can you talk about that? I do understand that one of his most famous quotes is pray, hope, and don't worry.
Yeah, that's super relevant. I mean, and it touches every denomination. It's not just one thing. So that message is something that we spread a lot through the Padre Pio Foundation of America. Praying you can pray. Hoping is easy, right? Those two things you can do, but the worry thing is what people always call us and say, I know I can pray, I have hope, but this worrying is, and Padre Pio said, God is merciful. He will hear your prayer. So that's a really important part of that particular quote, because that's what he went on to say. He's relevant. So many people to this day. He has such a great following of devotees, and I'm fortunate, and my staff at the Padre Pio Foundation of America is so fortunate to hear stories from people all the time. And I could go on for hours telling stories that we've heard. And he's still interceding for people to this day. We get calls of people saying, Padre Pio helped me, he did this for me, he did that for me. And we just go, yeah, that's because he's he's there for us. So that's his relevance today. And his following is, to me, bigger than ever.
Yeah, and we just thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all of that with us. And thank you for the good work that you do with the foundation. Julie Fitts Ritter, Executive Director of the Padre Pio Foundation of America. Thanks again, Julie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.